All right, welcome back to Overengineered, the podcast where we ask the question, what's the absolute best way to do things we already have a perfectly acceptable solution for? Today, I'm here with Ben Holmen, who has been running a pair amid scheme.
That's right.
For the folks on the internet who've been following along. And Ben and I are going to be talking about pairing for a little while. But before we do, Ben, do you want to introduce yourself and say hi?
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, Chris. I am a developer in the Laravel community. I've been running an engineering team for a company and am now transitioning to an IC role, probably about the time this episode comes out. So I'm up in there coding and having fun in the community.
How did so basically, I don't remember exactly when this happened, but
yeah,
months ago now, right? The pairing started, and I don't know how it started, but I remember just seeing on Twitter people suddenly talking about, man, I had this great pairing session with Ben. Oh, everyone should pair with Ben. And I was just like, what is going on? Like, who's this Ben guy? Why is everyone pairing with him all of a sudden? And how do I get in?
Right. Well, it worked, I guess. I mean, that's the best case scenario. Thanks for that, Chris. Well, so I've been exploring ways to participate in the community more over the last year or so. So I've done a couple of things, but always looking for ways to connect with people. And this just happened serendipitously. So I like to pair. I love to pair. I pair on my team every single week. I pair with every developer on the team. And I've done that for years. So it's an old habit for me, and I see a lot of value in it. And then Joe Tannenbaum of Terminal fame and former guest on this pod, he and I were friendly on Twitter, but didn't know each other. We were friendly, not friends. You know how it is.
Yeah.
And I saw in passing, he mentioned that he'd never had a chance to pair before. He wanted to do it sometime. So I just took a chance and said, hey, I pair all the time. I'd be happy to pair with you. Never paired with a stranger before. Let's give it a try. And Joe, being a great guy, was down. He is ready to give it a shot. So we can thank Joe, who, by the way, named the scheme the pyramid scheme. The man has a penchant for naming.
That's
so
fantastic.
We just got together and became friends. That wasn't intended to say, let's start something in the community. That was just two guys saying, hey, let's get together and get to know each other a little bit. And we paired on some terminal stuff, some ANSI code, for colors and formatting in terminal, which is dear to both of us, and had a great time, and then became friends, excuse me, true friends after that, which has been a big blessing to both of us since then. And a few months after that, we were just having a conversation. I can't remember what, but kind of around getting out in the community a bit more. And one of us suggested, why don't you just put it out there and see what happens? I can't remember. This is in February or so. And so I did. I used Joe's endorsement of, yes, Ben's not a crazy person on the internet. You'll enjoy this. And just put a tweet out. And for some reason, it really resonated with people, the idea of pairing with someone. And in that tweet, I just had a calendar link. And I put up a quick blog post to explain why I think pairing is a good move and why pairing with strangers might be a thing. And I cast it as an experiment, just I'm taking a chance, see how this works. And I immediately got 15 or so appointments on my calendar. So that booked me out for several months of pairing. Yeah, I was really blessed by the response to it. And the experiment part just totally worked. It turns out that you can pair with strangers on the internet. So these are literally people, some of whom I've never heard of. It's people all around the world. Some people I'm familiar with. But you just show up on a Zoom call, spend 5-10 minutes getting to know the person, and then hop into whatever you're working on that day. And it totally worked. So I don't know where you jumped in, but it must have been a few pairing sessions in where, again, we're promoting hey, I just paired with this person. You should give it a try as well. And the idea was not that Ben Holmen pairs with the internet, but that people in general pair with each other.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me that when we were talking about the show and what we were going to be talking about, I kind of pitched that maybe we step back a little bit further from the pairing conversation conversation and more to just like fulfillment as a concept, like developer
Mhm.
fulfillment, which I think this plays into. And I think there are a couple other things that you and I have both been doing that I think are interesting to talk about there. But it really feels like this conversation is so perfect for this moment in time when I think a lot of folks who, you know, folks who got a good sense of community. I think the Laravel community in particular is really solid on Twitter right now.
Mhm.
And a lot of folks really get value from that. And, I know for myself, I think I've talked about this here, but so I won't go into it too much, but just like I think particularly over the quarantining portion of the pandemic, having that community to lean on was really, really helpful for me. And I think because I lacked interaction with my like traditional friend group, it gave me a little bit of a shove to reach out to people and turn those connections into something a little bit more solid than just like, hey, we at mention each other occasionally
Mhm.
on the internet. And I see a lot of folks doing various versions of that right now in this moment when there's a bit of an unknown about how long the Twitter community may
That really
last.
drives up the urgency of, like, solidifying those connections, right? And
It
taking
really
it
does.
to another level. Yeah.
And so I know for myself, I am not typically this type of person, but I definitely just DM people and was like, "Hey, do you want to just get on Zoom and chat?" Just
Mhm.
because. And this feels very much like a maybe a little bit more structured version of the same thing. It's like, let's turn these connections that we have informally into something a little more, and just like getting to know other developers, getting to make new friends, new relationships
Mhm.
is like really valuable.
Right.
And I can see how I love to pair as well. We do, I think at Internet we do it very frequently sometimes and fairly infrequently other times, depending on sort of what's going on. I think if we have a set of very well defined problems that everyone's
Right.
kind of on board with the solution already, there's less pairing. And when we have fuzzier problems that are useful to have multiple sets of eyes on, we do more pairing. But
Mhm.
I think it's a very, very useful tool. And, especially when so many people are remote, being on a call with someone else talking about what you're doing is also just really nice.
Right. I found it's a great way to hype people up, like building those connections. For
Mm,
me, the pairing is an excuse to get to know people and to build
right.
connections. But the result is what you're describing. It's making a connection where you could have a Zoom call with someone and just
Yeah.
hang out.
Yeah.
I know Andrew Schmelian, I think that's how you say his name,
Okay.
genius in the community. He's the guy who built the GitHub issue receipt printer, if that comes to mind,
Oh,
and
okay. Yeah.
general
Yeah.
kind of
I,
mad scientist
I
guy.
know him around the internet. Yeah.
Yeah. I paired with him and he was carrying on this idea of a pyramid scheme, but it turns out 5 or 6 of his calls were all just like, let's get together and talk about ideas, not writing a single
Hmm.
line of code. And so that's what we did together. We did some high level planning of something I was kicking around. But even just having that level of conversation was really rewarding for me to have with Andrew. And he was finding it
Hmm.
very rewarding to not code at all, but to just make those connections that you're describing. So having that hook to get started with that conversation, an excuse to get together, seems
Yeah.
useful. What are some of your hooks? Like if you're going to DM someone, what do you say beyond let's get together on Zoom and hang out?
Uh, I mean, I'm going to be honest. Well, no, I take that back. In the beginning, that is exactly what it was. I mean, I think the first person that I ever did that with was this is a maybe it's not the first, but this is a while ago when Aaron Francis was still working on his like rule builder
Yeah.
thing, at InterNACHI, we have like a sort of sophisticated rule builder implementation. And I was just like, hey, I love this problem space. I've been working in it a lot. Like, do you just want to get on the call and just like nerd out on this thing, you know?
So you had some connection or expertise you could offer. There's a little hook there.
Yeah, there was a little bit of a like, I know that we are both thinking about this problem. Like, do you just want to talk about it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the more obvious answer to your question is this podcast is basically that.
Yeah.
I mean,
you
this
certainly
podcast,
have a platform which isn't in. Like you can make an introduction, I would think, to many people.
It's easier to say, hey, do you want to come talk on my podcast than, hey, do you want to spend 90 minutes just like nerding out on things, you know? Like, and essentially they're the same thing. Like, it's just that we have the fancy mics out, you know?
And an audience in mind.
And an audience. Well, I don't know. I'm going to be honest. Like, the podcast certainly has a small audience. It is not very big. I think that 90, like 1.5 to 2.5 hours of like highly technical conversation is not necessarily everyone's
that's not going to rocket up to the top of the iTunes chart. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. But I honestly find that incredibly freeing because it's just like, that's not the point. You know, it's fun to have an audience, and like I'm not gonna lie that like there's like a fun little ego boost when you talk to someone who's like, oh yeah, I listen to the podcast. And it's like, hey, that's cool. Like this is neat. But yeah, for the most part, the podcast kind of started out as like, I've always wanted to really set aside some time to talk about this like thing that's been just like annoying me. And I never do. So like, what if we like do it as a podcast? But I kind of ran out of those topics pretty quickly. It's like most things that like most programming problems that bug me, I end up finding a solution that I'm happy with.
Yeah. And it's hard to talk about that solution for an hour and a half consistently.
Right.
Maybe 5 to 10 minutes.
So then it kind of quickly shifted into like, first, like, who are the people that I have something of a relationship with who I would love to like spend more time talking with. And now it's kind of branched out to even further, just like who's out there who wants to like nerd out about something. Like I'm game, you know? And yeah, it's exactly the same thing though. It's really just like an excuse to chat, get to know someone. I like to really get deep in the weeds on technical things. So I like that the sort of framework for the show is like, that's at least the premise, even if it doesn't always go that way. I think that's fun. But yeah, nowadays it's more just like, all right, now I get to spend an hour with Ben. You know, he's committed to it.
he's locked in. Yeah. I think it's one problem I've been trying to solve in the pairing scheme specifically is people who have never paired before or they want to start pairing at their company. And I'm happy to be the first person that they pair with. Like, I love breaking that ice for them. Yeah. But I think the same could apply to just cold DMing people and saying, hey, do you want to hang out? So I'd love to brainstorm with you. Like, how do you go from 0 to 1 in putting yourself out there and making those connections?
I think, and I mean, I'm going to sort of like hedge this a little bit with a little bit of like the future of Twitter is unknown, and maybe this is not as true as it had been a year ago. But I think it does help to put yourself out on whatever public space you're in. And like, you know, I've been saying Twitter, that's the place that I have been traditionally. I am very heavily trying to shift that to Mastodon, and it's been
Chris, I've been waiting for the Mastodon promo to hit. We're 9 minutes in. We got it.
Yeah, well, I have to bring
the concept of wherever you are, putting some work out publicly is a positive thing.
I think the problem is it's where the other people are is where you want to put things out publicly. because if you're trying to make connections with people, showing them that you are like maybe someone who's interesting to
Hmm.
connect with is a useful piece of that, you know? So I think I probably wouldn't have cold DM'd Aaron if like he and I hadn't been like interacting publicly on Twitter for a while,
Right.
right? Now now I have put myself out there enough that like I can kind of like reach a little bit further out to like connections of connections, friends of friends, like people
Hmm.
who listen to the podcast that I don't know particularly well. Like I think I have a little more flexibility now, but I think in the beginning that would be where I would start is like try to be authentically yourself, but public about it, you know, and talk about what you are interested in, not what you think other people want to hear from you,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Because the worst thing that you could get into is you've got 60 minutes booked with someone and now you feel like you have to continue to like project whatever sort of like facade you were
Right.
projecting
A
publicly,
persona. Yeah.
right? Like if the point of the whole thing is actual like personal fulfillment, right? And like connection, then it's got to start with that authenticity, right?
Hmm.
But that's where I would start. And it sounds like that's kind of what you did as well.
Hmm. I found I would just recommend putting the work out there, not to get a bunch of likes on it or to build a bunch of followers or whatever, but to be like an endorsement of you as an interesting person to talk to, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So, to use Twitter as an example, make sure your pinned tweet is like something interesting that you've been working on recently or something that you've built. And it doesn't have to be like built, shipped to market, huge success. It can be like, oh, I'm tinkering on this package, or this is this thing I'm thinking about. It's pretty low stakes, but putting out something so that if you DM someone, they look at your profile and say, oh, okay, this is kind of interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Or I want to learn more about this. That's a hook in itself. And it's promoting you as someone who's interesting to spend some time with.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that rings true. I now that I got started, I'm going to circle back to Mastodon just for an
Yeah, yeah.
instant
Here we go.
because I do think there's something interesting there, which is there are platforms, whether it's Mastodon or Blue Sky or Threads, one of these sort of upstart platforms where you can more quickly be a bigger fish in a smaller pond.
Hmm.
And I think there is, for someone who's trying to get out there and, you know, sort of establish themselves in a community, it's sort of a double-edged sword because it is going to be a smaller group of folks that you're kind of engaging with. But my experience right now, at least, is that the engagement is way, way higher. You know, you just like you put something out there and people respond, people favorite, people react in some way, much, much more than on Twitter right now.
Hmm.
So I do think that there's like an opportunity for someone who really wants to like make a concerted effort to kind of get out there and start to make those connections. Like if you become like one of the Laravel people on Mastodon, like there's a big empty hole there right
Right.
now that you can start to fill.
And there's an
And
appetite for that space right now.
there
Like this is
is,
an
yeah.
opportunity time.
Yeah, for sure. And so then, you know, if that's something that you're into, if you like the idea of like, you know, an open protocol, open standard, uh, public space, you can start to connect with other people who kind of share that value. You know, it's not going to be the same community that exists on Twitter right now, but
Hmm.
there is a community there. And I think while you're going to be, you know, you're going to be kind of connecting with different people, I think there's a big opportunity to kind of get a jump start in this
Hmm.
moment in time, and probably for the next year or two. I don't know. Like it's not like it's the next week or two. I think
Right.
that's going to be true for a while. Like that's how new platforms are. it doesn't feel like it's going away. So
I'm really interested in this moment in history on the internet. It feels like a throwback to like 2005 or so, where there's just a
okay.
lot of upheaval in social networks happening right now. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm really curious if we're going to coalesce on like one Twitter replacement or if we're going to see greater fragmentation into like splitting up that pie 5 ways. And that's not clear to me yet. I don't know if we're going to get a big winner out of it or if we're going to drive the internet into more corners, if that makes sense. I'm not mad
Mm-hmm.
about ending up in either of those locations, but it's a very interesting place to be at the moment.
Yeah, it is. I think that there's some value in having sort of a central place that everyone kind of knows to go to, especially in in moments of import.
Yeah.
Like I definitely know that there were, just big moments in time when being on the place where everyone else was how I kept on top of what was happening or
Right.
found out about what was happening. I think we would
Whether that's a
lose a little
healthy
bit of
thing or
that.
not, I
Yeah, I guess
definitely
that's true.
relate. Like
I guess
trying to
that's true.
get quick updates in the moment
Yeah,
feels really interesting. Like it definitely checks a lot of mental boxes. Whether that's great
sure.
for humanity or not, I don't know.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. I do think that Activity Pub is an interesting solution to this problem in a way. I don't know if it's actually going to happen or not, but the fact that Threads is, a pretty big place that people are moving to
Hmm.
and is already federated through Activity Pub to a degree, I think is really leaves me feeling optimistic about that as a potential sort of like it is both fragmented, but there is a way for these silos to kind of connect to each other
Hmm.
so that, yeah, you have a little bit of the best of both worlds. I mean, I think you also get there are downsides to that whole approach too, but people can kind of go off into their little corners of the internet, but not be totally isolated. And I don't know. I'm hopeful about that. I'm not, I wouldn't make a bet
Yeah.
yet,
I wouldn't be betting on anything right now.
but I am, you know, I'm optimistic. So, all right. I'm not going to turn this into the Mastodon podcast. So we'll step back. I think, I think another thing that has just been on my mind lately, and it seems like this is something that resonates with you, is just like the pairing and connecting. All of this is like a means to an end, right? It's like a way to be connected to people
Hmm.
and like sort of feel fulfilled as individuals. And I think another piece of that for me certainly is finding ways to like do do stuff in the real world.
Hmm.
I think particularly as a developer and even I think even as a web developer, like I even find that sometimes I will experiment with like building desktop applications or
Right.
mobile
Why does that feel
applications,
more real than a web app? I don't know,
but it
but it
does,
does.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like even that is like a step towards a like, look, I can click on this icon in my dock and an app pops up. Look at
Yeah.
how cool that. But even more than that, yeah, like building things in physical space, I think can be really satisfying
Hmm.
as someone who builds things, but it's all sort of like just this flat virtual facade of something,
Right.
right?
Oh, yeah, it's totally different. Building a physical object that you can hold in your hands and give to someone or show to someone is totally different, even than publishing a project where people can interact with it online. It's
Yeah.
it's just it feels like the next level, but it's certainly a different level, and the satisfaction you get from it is different.
Yes.
What kind
So
of things are you building?
okay, well, I've been taking a sewing class
Oh, that's right. You made
and
pants, right?
I made pants. Yeah.
Yes. All right, let's hear about the pants.
That this is my latest thing. Yeah, I okay, I am relatively a relatively, I guess, crafty person. I don't know.
Hmm.
I went to school at a school that was very arts focused. I just am fairly comfortable with arts. And my mom and my grandparents were both in the textile world. So I kind of grew up around this stuff a little bit.
Yeah.
But I've always kind of just confidently said to my wife, like, someday I'm going to make myself a pair of pants that I really like. And she just kind of rolls her eyes at me, being like, dude,
Yeah.
you couldn't make a pair of pants if your life counted on it, And so recently, for I guess for Father's Day, she got me this 4 week pants
Yeah.
making workshop.
Pants, specifically pants making. She was helping
Specifically
you
pants making.
realize
Yep.
the very specific dream that you've been
Uh-huh.
talking about. Okay.
Exactly.
I can think of a few projects like this that I've been talking to my wife about for a decade. Maybe I'm going to get off this session and just mention, hey, so I know this guy, his wife got him a 4 week workshop to make pants.
You could just send her this episode.
All right,
Just be
perfect.
like, listen to this great episode that I was on. Yeah.
I think sewing is amazing because it's relatively low in tooling. Like you can get a used sewing machine on Facebook. I'm assuming not that much money.
Oh yeah. For
And then you're
basically
talking about like
$0.
seam rippers, like scissors, measuring tape, some pins. Like this is a really low barrier to entry. Doesn't take up a lot of space. It's
Yeah.
pretty neat. It doesn't mess up an environment.
Yeah.
And the materials are pretty inexpensive. And so learning is pretty cheap. Like if you screw up a yard of fabric, that's not that expensive. I think sewing as a intro to making skill is really high up the list.
Yeah, like all things, all of those things can very easily become not true.
Okay. All right.
I
Like
mean,
expense.
well, yeah, like as soon as you have a sewing machine, you're like, oh man, I really need a serger because I need to be able to finish these edges in a different
Like
way that this
every
other
hobby,
machine.
you're
Yeah.
immediately like, what's the $3,000 version of what I have right now?
Well, no, it's even worse because you need to have both. You need to have the one sewing machine and then the other sewing machine. You need two sewing
Okay.
machines.
What's a
It turns out.
serger? Can you explain that?
A serger is it's a machine that basically some people call it an interlock machine. It cuts the edge and finishes the edge at the same time.
Does it like roll it over and do the hem
No,
and
no, no, no. It
no?
doesn't do
Okay.
the hem. No, no, no. But like if you after the call, look at the inside of your t-shirt,
Yeah,
you'll
yeah.
see like the edge will have sort of like zigzag
Yep.
stitches
I'm looking
over
at it right now.
that wrap over the edge. That's done on a serger. And it's just like when you're dealing with like stretch
Hmm.
cottons, like something that you would use for a t-shirt, you essentially need that or else the seams are just not going to last. But
Do you
also
need it
just
on pants though? That's the question.
you don't. You can finish without a serger. It's just a lot more work because you have to like trim all your edges and then like sort of stitch them in a specific way and it's not as good. It's like
Hmm.
I can finish an edge. I can finish a hem in like 8 seconds on a serger or I can spend 10 minutes doing it
Right.
manually.
So I'm looking at my pants now, and
Okay.
it seems like the serger on the finish side has two parallel stitches.
Mm,
And then on the unfinished side, there's a pattern of the thread going back and forth. And so it feels like the serger gives you those two parallel stitches, which would be tough to do on a regular sewing machine without some variation, some wave, some like an uneven. Chris is looking at his pants now. I
I'm
hope
looking at my
every
pants too.
listener is like looking over their clothing right now.
I don't think that the two parallel stitches are necessarily I'm not an expert in this stuff,
Okay.
right? But a lot of times those two parallel stitches will just be someone being really good at sewing.
Okay. Much better than us. One thing I will say about sewing it that another box it checks is awareness of your environment. Because as soon as you try to sew your pants, you're going to look at every single pair of pants
Oh my
for the
God.
rest of your life. You're going to appreciate the craft that went into even the
Yeah.
cheapest pair of pants.
Yeah. And I literally am just like walking around being like, yeah, I think I could make that. I joke though, because I feel like I came away from this class totally vindicated. I was like, I could have totally made pants on my own
Without,
without any help.
but you
It
didn't,
turns out
Chris.
it's not that
You
hard. You
didn't
just
for a
literally
decade.
you just cut them out and then you sew them together. Like just follow the instructions. It's like cooking. It's like people
Yeah,
say they can't cook. Literally just do
just
every
do it.
step that it says on the recipe and it'll turn out good enough, if not great, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, that's been my little thing right now, and it's really fun. It's just like I have a pair of pants that I can wear. I'm now like teaching myself how to make like more complicated pockets because I don't really like the pockets on the pair of pants that I made,
Mm-hmm.
and so I have like a bunch of pieces of fabric with just a square of fabric with a pocket in it.
Yeah, just testing
Of
things out.
yeah, of
Yeah.
varying degrees of quality or different
So are you going to
styles.
make a second pair of pants? Is that in the future now, or like once you did
Yes.
this, you're done?
No. The first pair of pants I made in muslin, they're just sort of a test run,
Mm-hmm.
and I now have like adjusted the pattern in a bunch of different ways to account for like changes that like you know changing the shape of the legs, giving like a little bit more space in the ankle, a little less space, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
And now I've cut out like the proper fabric for the sort of quote real pair. We'll see.
Right. So you've
It
made
could.
pants, but you haven't made the pants yet.
I haven't made the pants yet. No, I'm
Okay.
still hunting those.
Yeah.
But what made me think of that? What made me think of this was you sent me this incredible 1,000 pixel display that you
Yes,
are
sir.
building, which is like the intersection of two things that I love. It is this whole just building interesting things in the physical world,
Mm-hmm.
combined with what I feel like I keep on coming back to on this podcast, this idea that this is that we are creating art, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are creative professionals, and a lot of times art is best when it's for the sake of itself, not to some productive end, I guess.
Right.
Not always. And it just feels like I only looked very briefly at the post that you sent over,
Mm-hmm.
but it just felt like
I'll
it was
fill
like
you in.
the perfect intersection of those two things. So I want to hear more.
Yeah. So I am also fascinated by the intersection of art and technology, which I don't think is unique to me, but the idea of building art in a way, being creative within a framework. So, for
Mhm.
example, I had an art minor in college for a while, and my big thing was photography. I did a number of photography classes and independent study. And for me, that really fit my brain well because it's very systematic. Like it's very technical to do well.
Sure.
You have to have a lot of technical knowledge, but that doesn't solve anything. Like you can be
That's
very technical and take extremely poor photos
that's
or
just the
make.
floor, right?
And so you're operating inside this technical system, but you have to be creative with how you use that. And I think that's present in the code we write to varying degrees. Even if you're not attempting to make art with it, you are certainly being creative with it.
Yep.
And this project, you mentioned it's 1,000 pixel display. I was inspired by a couple of things. The first is somebody took an e-ink display, like from a Kindle, and then they hacked it to play a movie extremely slowly. So they would take
Okay.
each frame from a movie and display it for several minutes, I want to say. So you could watch a movie over the course of days. And that idea of this laborious, slow display forcing you to interact with a movie, another form of art, in a totally different context was really satisfying to me.
Yeah.
So I didn't do that, but I was inspired by it. And then there's this other artist, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he makes mirrors out of unusual materials. So he makes mirrors out of fabric, he makes mirrors out of wooden blocks that angle toward or away from a light source so they turn light or dark. And this is when the Microsoft Xbox Connect was like a brand new thing using that. I don't even know what kind, if it's some kind of infrared or something, But basically, it
Mm,
was the introduction of gestures and recognizing a person in front
right.
of something. He was
Okay.
parsing that and then using a mechanical physical display to create an image of what was in front of it out of really unusual materials.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Oh,
He's taken that a bunch of directions. It's been an overall theme for his work. So that was very fascinating to me. And then I don't know what sparked it, but I had the idea that I could create giant pixels that would be like manipulated very laboriously and like very obviously. So we look at our computer displays and it's like, I don't know, millions of pixels and they all get updated 60 times a second or whatever. And the magic is gone, right? But if you saw someone like painting that display very slowly, it would be interesting and novel. And
sure.
so the idea is to not manipulate pixels in parallel, where you would change every single pixel at the same time, but in series, where you change one pixel at a time, 1,000 pixels, and the whole display is limited to one refresh. And where I've landed on it is about 3 seconds to change each pixel.
Okay.
There are 1,000 pixels, which is 40 by 25. My
Okay.
prototype is about 4 feet wide right now. But
Okay.
the final product would be about 6 feet wide by about 4 feet tall. And I have some friends who own a coffee shop in my town. My ultimate goal, and to be clear, this is an unfinished passion project that I pick up, work on a few days, and then set it aside for like 4 months. So
Sure.
the progress is not great. But the eventual goal is to have this in a physical space, have some kind
Yeah.
of ambient display updating it, but also allow people to control it through a web app. So now we get into a lot of coding. I'll start with the physical display. So I've set it up as basically a CNC plotter. If you've seen someone like with a pen that is drawing on a piece of paper in 2 dimensions, that would be
Okay.
a plotter. And so you have servos, which are just motors that you can control very precisely. One controlling an x axis, one controlling a y axis, and then some kind of third control mechanism to like push the pen into the paper and then pull the pen away from the paper. That's the most basic
Sure.
form of a plotter. This is also used in like cutting vinyl stickers. Instead of a pen, they'll have a knife that cuts a very specific path for like billboard size vinyl, all the way down to your little Cricut that you can set on your desk. That's a plotter. So I adapted a plotter controller. So I have a left and right, up and down axis, and then I use that third control to actuate. I got to back up to actuate the thing that changes the pixel, right? So
Okay.
you have to write some G code, which is a language that's used in CNC, to say go to this coordinate and
Hmm.
then run the motor to activate this pixel. And then I'm going to tell you the next one, but don't worry about it right now. Like your job is to go to this location and do something over and over and over. So I had to figure out G code. I wrote a Python script to hit a API endpoint to say what pixel do I need to do next and what am I doing with it. And then that spits out G code, which it pushes into the CNC controller. So those were new things for me. And then
Yeah.
there was all the physical stuff of like controlling servos and finding servo controllers and timing belts and aluminum extrusion to build the frame and 3D printing the little bits that hold things together to hold the limit switches on to be the actuator for the pixel, to hold the motor that spins the pixel. So all of these different disciplines are coming together. And I haven't even talked about the web app yet, which is the most familiar part of the project for me. Like
Sure.
build a web app. Okay, I can do that. Build an API. Okay, no problem. So I got to dabble in all these different areas. And on the prototype, I have a Raspberry Pi that is running the Python, which is communicating to a separate CNC controller. And then I have a dedicated power supply on the board. I had to figure out power supply for this thing. And I now have like 40 pixels by 4 rows, I want to say.
Okay.
I'm at about 160 pixels in my prototype right now.
Okay.
But man, so we're nerding out over engineering, right? So the amount of rabbit holes I've gone down on this thing is crazy.
I love it.
The first thing is the pixels, right? So this is a hobby project. I don't intend to sell this ever. I just want to make a couple of them and have fun with people. Like I've envisioned
Yeah.
putting this in my Zoom background and letting people tinker with it while while I'm on the call, basically. I just want to scratch my own itch and share it with people, basically. But 1,000 pixels, right? What do you make the pixels out of? It has to work. It has to not be super heavy, and it has to not be super expensive. So I've explored like foam balls, which turns out they melt if you spray paint them, and they're pretty inconsistent in size.
Mm.
Ping pong balls, which are cheap, but you have to pass some kind of wire through them to mount them. And as soon as you poke a hole in a ping pong ball, it's like opening a can of pop. It doesn't have any strength left in it. It needs
Oh,
the pressure
interesting.
inside. So if you poke holes in it, then it flexes, and then the spray paint that either makes it black or white cracks off and is lost. I bought tennis balls, not tennis balls, like bouncing balls, like 1 inch
Mhm.
diameter. I've bought wooden balls, which are inconsistent in size and way too heavy when you have 1,000 of them.
Did
My
you
current,
try discs?
okay, tell me, I would like to crowdsource great ideas for this because I don't feel like I've cracked it yet. What
I
kind of
mean,
disc?
like, why not just a disc? You could either 3D print it or like
Mhm.
cut it out of, balsa wood or something like that, and just paint the one side. Uh, put a small hole
Like a
through the center.
flat disc,
Yeah, like a flat
so not a
disc,
sphere.
just a circular disc. One side's black, one side's white. That's the first thing that comes to my
Yeah, I
mind.
like that because it's lightweight.
Cheap.
I did 3D print spheres, but I don't know if you've ever 3D printed like a dome shape. It looks great at the edges, but when you get to the top, the way the build lines work, it gets very obviously 3D printed.
Mm-hmm.
And but I'm
Yeah,
interested
like
in the
I'm
flat thing. I'm
thinking
trying to think of
of.
how I'd actuate it because I've been thinking about like my prototype literally has a rubber Lego wheel attached to a motor.
Okay.
And so it pushes itself into the sphere of the pixel, turns it a predetermined amount, and then
Mm-hmm.
pulls away from the pixel. But so I'd have to figure out a new actuator on the flap.
Well, I'm just thinking. Imagine. Okay. Here's what I'm actually thinking. I'm trying to think of where you see these anymore, but like there'd be sometimes like an event or a bar or something that gives out like those little wooden tokens.
Yeah.
Like I'm
Yep.
picturing basically one of those. You drill, excuse me, a very small hole through the center of it, right? You put your little Lego gear on a
Mm,
wire at the top of that hole, right? One side's painted black, one side's painted white, and you just uh rotate that little gear
right.
180 degrees to switch from
A
one
Lego gear
one
is a
pixel
really
to the other.
interesting idea because you could get the 1,000 of them for not too much.
Right.
Huh. I like that. That's some
We
good food for thought, Chris. We may
all
have solved
right.
something here.
The goal of over engineered is to have some sort of outcome at the end. I've kind of lost track of that, but
If
I
it's
really
worked, what your hit
appreciate
rate is.
yeah, I appreciate us getting back to the roots,
Yeah.
solving problems here.
Right now, I'm using Nerf balls. Do you know the
Okay.
Nerf guns that shoot like a sphere?
Yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah,
I
I've
think
seen
they're
them.
about like 7/8, 7 inch. They're a little bit smaller than an inch in diameter, which makes a smaller display. I like the idea
Sure.
of the disc because it's light.
I like the wooden disc too because there's something nice about wood,
Yeah.
right? You could sand them down and you could even stain, like just do a really dark stain on one side, and so
Hmm.
the dark pixel would still show some wood grain, which I think could be like just a really nice
Yeah.
uh visual element to it.
Yeah. One of the challenges I've run into is a tiny amount of variation in the size of an individual pixel. If you string those up either vertically or horizontally on a wire or a rod or something to support them. Just like half a millimeter of variation in each one times
Hmm.
40 pixels in the horizontal or 25 in the vertical, you're off by a significant amount. So
Right.
aligning each pixel in a predictable grid, you're close, but it's not precise. So I've got to figure that
Right.
out.
Yeah, you'd have to make some sort of like what if you made some sort of little jig that you
Mm-hmm.
could drop the token into and then it would give you space to like maybe cut
Yeah, how
a
do you
slot
adjust
that
it, right?
the gear would fit into, you
Mm-hmm.
know? I
Yeah.
don't know. It's tricky. It's definitely I get it.
I love working within constraints, though, and 1,000 of something without it being hundreds of dollars or way too heavy or whatever. A
Yeah.
thousand really doesn't seem like 40 by 25 doesn't seem like that much, but you multiply it by 1,000, it's a lot. For a while, I
Yeah.
was thinking about using LED strips, like addressable LED strips, to illuminate a ping pong ball, which was less
Mm-hmm.
satisfying to me because it didn't seem laborious. It didn't seem like it was
Right.
working hard.
Right.
But just as an interesting side note, 1,000 addressable LEDs, even at low power, like LEDs sip electricity, but 1,000 of them do not. And so
Hmm.
that was enough to really push the limits of like, how many watts is this display going to use? I think it was going to
That's
use
interesting.
something like 30 watts, maybe. Um,
Yeah.
or maybe it was 300. And so then you have like, I want to say 40 meters of LED strip, and you'd have to have multiple power supplies, and you get like yellowing if you try to, by the end of like 10 meters of LED strip, there's enough voltage drop across that the color of the LEDs changes. So
That's
again,
interesting.
1,000 is something. It feels like that's like a lot, but not a lot. But it's certainly enough to cause problems that you then have to figure out.
Okay, wait. Here's another like thinking outside of the box idea.
Mm-hmm.
What if you had 1,000 individual LEDs, just like the two
Yep.
prongs,
Yep.
right? One is soldered in
Yep.
and the other has some sort of actuated switch. And so to turn on the LED,
The
you're
actuator is
actually like
physically
flipping a
switching on.
switch.
I love this idea. So how much does 1,000 like really satisfying like clicky like
the
space shuttle toggle switches cost?
the switches are probably the expensive piece of it. The
Oh,
LEDs would be
100%.
cheap. You could
Let's say
you
they're
could
50 cents each. That is a $500 display.
yeah. Yeah. God, it is wild. The cost just the cost really does add up quickly, no matter how you
Even
look
ping
at it.
pong balls. It's like $90 of ping pong balls. Ping
Right.
pong balls. Little
Right.
plastic spheres.
Right.
Huh. I love that
Oh,
idea though. That makes an LED actually feel satisfying, like the
right.
machine is working. So
I mean, especially if you
one of the
heard the
ambient
click.
modes that I've created is a clock. So it would just
Okay.
display the minutes, like 12:54. It can barely update in 1 minute. So the clock is struggling to keep up. Picture if you go from like 12:59 to 1 o'clock, how many
Uh-huh.
pixels do you think you need to change if your letters are like 4 by 8? It
A
turns out
lot.
to be, it takes several minutes to make it from 12:59 to 1 o'clock. And it's still
That's
catching
so
up when it
funny.
switches to 101. And so then, like, all those changes, some of them were in vain, and it has to keep up.
Right.
This reminds me, I don't know if you've seen this art installation. Someone bought a very expensive, like, factory robot that I don't know how many axes they have, but basically, like, something that you would build a car with in a Ford factory.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And the thing is leaking hydraulic fluid, and
Yes.
the
Oh my God.
machines.
What an incredible installation.
So it is basically
Yeah, go ahead.
squeegeeing the floor of its own hydraulic fluid and barely keeping up. Like, that's the kind of vibe I'm going with. Like, this is a machine who is
Yeah.
struggling to
I think
display.
it died. I think it
It
finally
did?
died. Yeah.
Okay, was that for
It
real
took
that it was
years.
leaking its own
It
hydraulic
was,
fluid?
yeah, so for everyone who's listening, it's one of those like very high tech robotic arms that you see on like a factory floor, mounted in like a white box basically.
Mhm.
And they constructed it in a way that the hydraulic fluid that controls the arm is seeping out very slowly, and the arm had basically like a bowl scraper, like a silicone squeegee or whatever. And the whole installation is just this robotic arm constantly drawing the fluid back into this like reservoir at the bottom that would then like somehow get back into the robot. So like the hydraulic as and this took years, I believe. I think it took like 5 years or something for it to die. But over time, like the robot would like miss a drop here or there,
Mm.
and slowly over time, it like actually lost the fluid that was necessary to control the arm anymore. It's an incredible piece of art. Yeah, yeah. I totally get where you're coming from. That's exactly, yeah. It's perfect. Oh,
So a ton of switches. I have to see if that's feasible. I did look into like LED matrices. So
hmm
like this is a older school approach. You can hook all the cathodes or a number of cathodes together, a number of anodes, and then something to do with intersecting basically two axes. You can address individual LEDs like in an analog way. When we talk about
hmm
addressable LEDs, there's like a shared bus and they're all connected to like three wires. This is not that. This is like I am going to actually produce a voltage at this particular electrical
right. You've
connection.
got like one wire that runs to all of them, and then 1,000 wires that run to the other, essentially.
Yeah, it's better than 1,000 though. It's less than that because there's like some analog math happening
Oh,
basically.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I don't
That's cool.
remember how it works. I did some research on it. But
Oh.
again,
Oh,
getting
sure.
a
Yeah,
thousand
yeah.
of them to work is not easy. Like
Right.
a
Yeah.
100 or 200. Yeah.
I mean, I remember in college I built a binary calculator, on like a breadboard with individual like logic gates and
Yep.
wires.
Yeah,
I
it's very
think
similar to that, I think.
it could add up to 4, and it took me like a month.
We truly do stand on the shoulders of giants, right? Like, how
And
many
I'm
of
not
those
kidding.
machines are inside the computers that we're using every day?
Right.
Like,
Right.
what, billions, trillions, whatever it is.
Billions.
How many?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
insane. And yeah, it
It's
took you
so
a month to
funny.
create.
It really did. I mean, and it really did. I think it could add 1 or 2 plus
Yeah.
1 or 2. I think that is the entire the entire calculator, and it really did. I had to. Oh, it's so funny. I did. Um, I had a thought earlier that just popped back into my head, which is for your clock. You know what you
Yeah.
should do for every given frame. Also render the the frame that follows. So you have 101, render
Mm-hmm.
102, and prioritize any common
Mm-hmm.
pixels between the future and the current frame,
Right.
so that at least um you know you're
Did you
not
tell the robot the optimal squeegee pattern as well, Chris? Or did you just let the robot figure out how to die? That was a thought though. Like, how do you pick the next pixel to go to, right? Do you go to the farthest one, the slowest? Do you go to the next one? Do you pick a random one? Yeah.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would absolutely work. That is a optimal solution to it. Whether
I mean, I
optimal is
know.
best or not.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
well,
So next steps in that one are figure out the pixels. I'm gonna look up that switching. I've gone through a bunch of. We don't have time to get into the web app at this point, but I've gone through a number of different stacks on that just for the fun of trying. Like, hey, I've never written a Node app. Let's give
sure.
that a shot. What's that like?
Sure.
I've never.
Yeah.
So it's gone through a few iterations there. But
I
this
would love
this
to experiment with like the sort of like physical interacting with physical devices in
yeah.
languages that I'm familiar with. Just like how do I write to some physical object with PHP? I've
Hmm.
never done it, and I'm very curious about that.
I have never done it either. I've done it. I mean, like Arduino's with what is it called? Processing is their flavor of C, I think,
Hmm.
and then Python now. So on most like hobbyist devices, there are GPIO pins. I don't know what that means. General purpose input output, maybe.
I assume so. Yeah,
And I know you can interact with them with those two languages. I've never tried PHP. I have no idea. You
could be
probably just
fun
call a
just to see.
subsystem that is using
Well,
C, I'm going to guess.
I'm pretty sure that there are ways to like write to like a serial, like if you had a serial port somehow,
Yeah.
right? I think there's a way. There are ways in PHP to still just like write to the individual pins of a serial port.
If I had to guess, there is a thin wrapper for a common C function
Mm-hmm.
that made it into the PHP core in about
Probably.
2004.
Yep. That sounds right. Well, unfortunately, I never do this, but we just kind of had a scheduling mishap, and I have a hard stop pretty soon. So I want to make sure that we have 2 or 3 minutes to close out. Is there anything? Is there anything that you came in being like, I want to talk about this that we didn't get to, or anything that like is burning that you want to
Yeah. I just
take a
want to
minute?
leave with an encouragement for someone who's listening who needs to get from 0 to 1 on pairing or connecting, and you're not sure how to do it. I just want to encourage you that it's not as big of a deal as you think. Like you're going to finish that first pairing session that you reach out on, and it's going to be easier than you thought it was. It's going to have gone better than you thought. So don't psych yourself out of it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, make those connections. You've got this. Everyone has something to offer, even if you feel like you don't have a lot to offer, or you're not unique enough or special enough. Just do it.
I agree. I would also say like sometimes people are not going to be up for it, and that's also like it's just
Yep,
part of the
it's
part of the
fine.
game. That's fine. Uh and like there are lots of other people who are. I'm curious about I actually I have I'm thinking about doing some of your pyramids. I'm also
Yes,
thinking
please
about
do.
I've been tinkering with the idea of just inviting people to come on this show with like a specific technical problem that they're trying to solve, and just spend a half an hour trying to solve it like through audio only, right?
Hmm.
So that may be on the agenda. But yeah, there are lots of people who are interested. Everyone out there is looking for connection, right? We're all a little bit too afraid to like
Yeah.
be the one to reach out first. So like in my experience,
Yeah, that's the
same as
truth.
you, like everyone wants it. Yeah. All right. Well, that was kind of a plug, but do you have anything of yours that you would like to plug, or anything?
I
How
just
do
want to
people
get
find you
any
on
and
the
all
internet?
feedback on my kilopixel display. That's all I want out of this. Pair with somebody and tell me your great idea for a 20-cent pixel.
Where's the best place to find you on the internet?
You can find me at benholman.com and then take that to your social network of choice. They're all there.
Awesome. All right, Ben, this has been really fun.
It was a
Thank
pleasure,
you for
Chris.
hanging, and we'll do a second one where we're not constrained to just a reasonable amount of time, but we can take an
We'll get
unreasonable amount of
really
time.
indulgent next time. This wasn't
Sounds good.
nearly enough.
Take it easy.